Welcome to Reach Out here at the Voice 17104 in Harrisburg, PA, at the Derry Street United Methodist Church, at least for now. My name is Justin Geist, and I am here with my friend and compatriot in social justice, Mr. Bill Jameson, here at the advent of yet another year. It seems to happen every year. We just get another year in which to live. How about that? Isn't that something? It's as though we create these imaginary systems of time, and then we're surprised when they happen upon us.
Until the last one.
We never know, though. That's the problem.
Well, we know that we're tumbling down the road towards it in terms of our demise on this earth. You know, we're the only ones who basically are the keepers of time that we know of. We don't know whether or not whales keep time or porpoises keep time, but we know that we keep time, and when time runs out, it means that we're done.
A lot of people would say there's absolutely no way they do. I'm not of that inclination, but at the same time, we're ending their time on Earth.
Yeah, oh yeah, and I don't know why people have the audacity to doubt other kinds of intelligence. I mean, just because we don't know, then we doubt that it exists. I mean, for crying out loud, we've had so many interesting relationships with animals that should change our minds. I mean, when a gorilla takes care of a baby that falls into the cage, you know, and the mother comes and protects that baby until humans can come and take it, there's something going on.
And it's very similar, I think, to that relationship that we believe to have between civilized people and savages. The idea that, oh, those savages, they're not even human. We can do with them whatever we please.
That's ego.
Of course.
You know, and it's been more true of certain people coming out of Europe than other people around the world. But it hasn't necessarily been something that, for example, the Japanese didn't use to their disadvantage or advantage, however you want to see the history of their time in China, say, for example, or the Chinese with their time in Vietnam. You know, we start to see ourselves as being superior to others, and consequently, when we become superior to others, our policies are that we can annihilate them at least.
Mm-hmm. Or any gradation up to that. Treat them poorly, tax them, beat them, whatever, that we can just treat them as less than we are.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, where that divergence in any sort of real ethics comes. The idea that people who you should obviously see as beings aren't quite as much beings as you are.
and yet we're trying to maintain this narrative that somehow or another we grew up as a species, that we became more clear in our humanity to others, that we become more accepting of diversity, that we invite others in to give us your tired, your poor, into our, you know, what do we call our society? Great society, but we call it exceptional society. You know, there was a time when we invited others and all that kind of thing, and now we have reversed course. And I don't know what that means either, because our narrative was that we were going in a certain direction, and that's a more accepting and a more, use the words, democratic, meaning inclusive.
But was that a narrative for everyone, or was that just for a few of us who really wanted to see it that way? Because I know there's absolutely a contrasting narrative that people love those olden times. They love those old conservative family values.
I can't argue. I can't argue that. I can argue that there has been this idea out there of becoming an inclusive, diverse society after we killed off the Native Americans and don't mention them anymore. That narrative has been true, and at the same time, obviously, you know, I mean, we have a white man that they're looking for right now in Texas who shot a 7-year-old black child.
So how much do you want to bet that when they find him, they don't just open fire?
Oh, they don't just open fire, but even before you get to that, you know, this man terrorized. He shot two people, three people, killed one little girl. He terrorized. And when McVeigh went into Oklahoma, he terrorized. And that person who went to that in Washington D.C. and put that bomb, they terrorized. The people who go to those clinics where people do abortions, they terrorize.
And yet we don't or won't use that word
They're
when we
lone
speak
wolf,
about
so
them.
something,
They're
somebody with a
troubled.
problem, troubled,
They're troubled.
right?
They are really just suffering from something. They have a mental illness, and I'm not downplaying or mocking mental illness. Quite the opposite.
No, but
That
when
is to
it becomes
say,
your rationale for all of those kinds of acts, as opposed to, say, an act from somebody who has a Muslim surname or an Arab surname or however that works.
there are these infographics that really accurately do predict what the media and people say about these acts after they happen, and it goes like, well, if they are of Arabic descent, it's like, well, it was just a terrorist. And if they're of African American descent, they're like, well, it's just a thug.
Yeah, right.
And Hispanic, etc., and so forth. Then if they're white, oh, they're just a troubled youth. They're just a lone wolf. They just have some mental illness.
Let's take him and get a hamburger on the way to jail.
Look, if we're going for ideals, I honestly think that, yeah, you shouldn't come in and just open fire on that guy. But at the same time, you shouldn't give him a treaty. You shouldn't give him a nice little sweet before we send him off to jail.
Well, no, it's not about him. And it's not about that specific incident even. It's about our overall attitude about these things, And when we put things in those kinds of pigeonholes, it allows us to make certain kinds of suggestions, certain kinds of decisions. And also, I mean, it builds up a construct of what the world is, as we say, this is the way it is. And this is the way, therefore, that we will react to it. If it's a white person, he's troubled. Let's treat him.
Because they're all troubled. Every one of them is troubled, and every one of them is a terrorist. That's the problem. And it's just how we talk about it that really just obfuscates the whole thing.
You have a 7-year-old child that is dead. And we, as a nation, refuse to recognize the serious dynamic that takes her life and a lot of lives like that. And we have refused to recognize that dynamic from 1609 until now. It's always been okay, basically, and one way or another we have found to make it okay. And seeing this individual as a lone wolf, seeing this as an individual as someone who is troubled, in need of our help and sympathy, is one of the ways that we do that. We say it's okay.
I saw a really telling graphic on Facebook the other day that said, oh, there's a fear of some of the majority white population in America. They very much fear becoming a minority in America. And then the response is, why? Are minorities treated badly in America?
Yeah.
And the answer is, of course they are, and everyone knows that they are, and it's just implied.
There's a thing called projection. There was a lot of guys who had slaves out there in his field on his plantation who didn't sleep too good at night. Because he knew that if he was a slave, if he was treated the way that he treats them, that he would be an angry individual, enraged and ready to do the master in. And he projects that onto the slave, Myself, many times I've said, I don't know why the slave doesn't feel that way. I wish the slave felt more that way. I mean, there could have been slave rebellions every day. There were a heck of a lot that we don't hear about. But they project. And they project onto other people. Especially they project their bad values and their bad attitudes and their bad behavior. They project that onto other people. And many times it's like, let's accuse them before they can accuse us. A wife of Bass Tale in Go. What's his name? Um, Canterbury Tales.
Oh, you're dipping way back there. No, good.
Yeah.
It's definitely good.
Yeah.
I never knew quite how to read Chaucer when I was in high school. It seemed very alien and yet very familiar at the same time.
Oh wow. Yeah. Well, but a lot of it is like still current.
Yeah.
You know, and that wife of Bath saying that before your husband can accuse you of what you've done, accuse him of it, whether he's done it or not. You know, and this is an attitude that our so-called majority takes. I say so-called majority because, I mean, for example, women outnumber men, but they refer to women as a minority.
Yep. And there is also a fallacy that women vote primarily in a liberal direction. But look at the people who voted for Donald Trump. At least the white women. Women of color voted differently, admittedly. But white women, grand majority, I think it's at least 60% voted for Trump.
But it's hard to say whether or not people voted for Trump or it's because of the liberal or conservative or those kinds of categories. You know, I think we've gotten to a point where our politics has defied those categories. You have people who voted for Trump because they feel outside of the establishment, regardless of whether or not they feel they are conservatives outside the establishment or anything else outside the establishment.
To me, it's remarkable that he was able to convince people that he was somehow one of them. That he was somehow outside of the establishment, outside of the wealthy elite. He is the very definition and embodiment of wealthy elite.
Yeah, but here's the thing that people have to look at and never forget is that they voted against Hillary Clinton. You see, people. I mean, we keep saying they like Donald Trump. They like Donald Trump. But don't forget who was running against Donald Trump. You know, in many respects, we have to remember that a vote for Donald Trump was a vote against Hillary Clinton. And she did a very good job of making herself an enemy, of calling people, what did she call them, a basket of deplorables.
She was a Goldwater girl.
They're still doing it. I mean, I heard Nancy Pelosi in the House the other day talking about the people who are in Trump's base. She may as well have used the word deplorables.
And you see how far the left has fallen from its roots with the left, with the working class, with unions. You see how far away that has drifted and how distant it now is. And I mean, I suppose it had been a shift for some time, but you really see, of course, that shift from the Rainbow Coalition of the 80s, the 90s, to the New Democrats.
Well, that was
the New Democratic Coalition?
Well, remember,
Clinton in 92.
Remember, you got to go back to Bill Clinton, basically. Yeah. You have to go back to Bill Clinton making a move that he called moving the party to the center.
We talk about pivots a lot in terms of international affairs, but that was a pivot.
Oh, that was a great pivot, you know. And that was a pivot that was for taking the money from the corporatists and leaving out their traditional base. And the Democratic Party has been on that role and remains on that role. I'm talking about the established party. You know, we got some members of the Democratic Party who are new to the Democratic Party, like what's her name out of Brooklyn, you know.
AOC.
And we're trying to, in some way, invent a new narrative saying that that's the Democratic Party. But Nancy Pelosi and the rest of them are showing us in reality that they still remain the Democratic Party and that they will thrash any of these newcomers who come to oppose them.
Well, we should have seen that coming, of course, and we did. The whole idea of a loyalty oath that we saw back in 2016 in those elections, the idea that if you wanted the support of the DNC, you had to sign that oath saying that we're not going to support certain things, or that we are going to adhere to the vision or the policy platform of the Democratic Party or the DNC.
Right.
And that was absolutely important to them. That was very necessary.
And
Because they by now had become that, backed by corporations, that big time corporatist party. And if you see, if you see
No.
why nothing is happening on healthcare, or why very little is going to happen
it's not
very
going
likely
to.
this year on healthcare,
Nothing.
it's because look at Cory Booker. He's taken huge money. Look at Beto O'Rourke. He's taken huge money from Big Pharma. Look at Chuck Schumer. Actually, don't look at Chuck Schumer. I'm tired of Chuck Schumer. Let's not look at Chuck Schumer anymore. But if we did for a moment, we would see how much money that he has taken from Big Pharma over the years, and it is in the tens of millions. I can almost guarantee it.
And I was going to say, don't forget Nancy Pelosi made the very clear statement that the reason for her power is that she's the best fundraiser. She's the best money raiser. She's the one who can go to corporatists and take the money. And therefore she deserves to be the speaker.
That was one of the big things.
You know.
I heard people saying, they're like, but look how much money she makes. Look at how good she is at bringing in donations. Look at how tough she is. She's a real fighter, and that part's all right in its proper way, like in its proper.
No, it ain't. I'll tell you why it ain't. Because the other day, for example, I have one example. Schumer and Pelosi sat with Donald Trump, and they were supposed to be talking about this wall and these policies, and it became a slugfest.
Shocking.
You know, okay.
Shockingly.
And I'm listening to the side, you know, on the left, and what are they saying about Pelosi? They're saying she got big gonads. You know, that she's tough, that she will get in there and she will fight because she's got these big gonads.
Firstly,
You know,
that is wildly sexist.
Absolutely, but that's what they said.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. I mean, you listen to their left-wing talk shows, you know, and this is what they are priding her on. Not good sense, not good policy, not caring about the welfare of the American people, but on having the gonads to oppose Donald Trump. We will judge people not on what they do, not on what they say, not on what they have done in the past, but on whether or not they're willing to stand up to Donald Trump. And that's it. That's the whole basis of our politics now.
Maybe she's just hoping that she can get him and Pence out of the way and just step right
Whatever
in.
she is hoping. I'm not even talking about her. I'm talking about the people who are the so-called left of this political process. That these are the values that they are supporting now. They're not supporting whether or not you have good policies about welfare. You talked about the health care. I don't hear the left talking about health care, much less Pelosi. But I don't hear the left. You know, they're talking about Trump every day, and whether or not, no matter what it is that he decides, we got to be opposed to it. If he says we're going to go to peace, they say we got to go to war.
I'm not even hearing our progressive saviors like Kamala Harris talking about health care. I'm certainly not hearing Beto talk about health care. Oh, when he was talking about health care, he said, well, I'm not, he didn't say he's not for single payer. He's like, well, I'm for a solution that benefits both big insurance companies and people. Yeah, that doesn't exist.
Where is that solution?
That does not exist, because if you're balancing those scales, it will always be weighted towards the big insurance companies. There is just no denying it.
No. Happy New Year, by the way, everybody, 2019.
I titled our show, Happy New Year? I put a question mark on it.
Right on.
Because, is it, I don't know, we said this last year, and sure, in many ways, I don't know, I had a pretty good year. Maybe you did. But just overall and in general, it's got to just be a year of steadfast resistance, I guess. And does that really make for a good year? I guess.
Yeah.
It just makes it for a tough year.
I call this year the year of the birth of the crisis. Not that we haven't had stillbirths till now, but this is the year that, who was that? Step fully grown from her father's head. Was that Zeus's daughter? Who was that? Was that Hera? And she was Zeus's wife.
I don't know. They mixed it up. It could have been her daughter too. It could have been his daughter too. Maybe they intermarried.
But she was fully grown when she was born. She stepped basically out of Zeus's head. You know, she came from his brain right in her mother's womb. But this year, it's a fully blown crisis. It's fully birthed. It stepped from the Father's head at the end of 2018, and we enter 2019 with this monstrosity before us. Because this year, the way I see it, is going to be the year that sets all this stuff afire. All this stuff afire. You know, I have down here that a good example of it is what we're doing right now as we speak. We have a government that is partially shut down.
Oh yeah. What parts? What parts of it
Oh,
are
that's
shut
that's a
down?
good one. I hope it's not my Social Security check.
Actually, it is, isn't it?
I hope not. We'll see. I'll know next Wednesday. Uh,
It is a lot of. It's a lot of benefits. What it is, it's a lot of what Republicans might call entitlements. I know it's that.
hey, I know there's a lot of people who work for the government who ain't getting paid. I know there's people who do the TSA stuff and they're working and they're not getting paid. I know there's a lot of people who do the so-called Homeland Security stuff and they're working and they're not getting paid. You know, I know that we have developed a politics. We as a nation have developed a politics where it's okay for our leaders to just absolutely discard us. To just absolutely say we're not going to be open.
Mm-hmm.
That this is the kind of politics, this is the kind of caring nation that we have become. And I say that we have become a dysfunctional nation in terms of governing. That when you come around to accept, as a citizen and as a so-called leader, that it's okay for your government to close and not consider the welfare of its citizens, I don't know how else to describe you besides dysfunctional.
This dude has said in the past and now that he'll shut it down for weeks,
It's not
months,
that
or
dude.
even years.
It's not that dude.
In so many ways, it is
No,
that
sir. No,
dude.
sir. That we have come around to that kind of politics results in having a dude like that. This isn't the first time we shut down this government. The idea of shutting down this government is what I'm talking about. This idea is a gem that was still birthed years and years ago. That we accepted the idea that a government could be shut down so that we can have an individual like him in a position to shut it down.
So is it never acceptable to shut down a government?
It's not acceptable to discard the welfare of your people. A government exists for the welfare of its citizens and only for the welfare of its citizens. And where do I get that from? I get it from a declaration called independence. The government exists for the welfare of the governed. And it's never to our welfare to shut down. So my answer to you is no, the government should never shut down. We should not accept an idea that a government can shut down, that a government can stop considering the welfare of its people. No, that's not what government is. In essence, the government is the people. So how can it shut down?
And as I was alluding to, it's interesting. If you take a look at what is shut down.
Yeah.
'Cause the military does not shut down.
Of course.
Senators and representatives and every elected official, they're still getting paid.
Of course.
They're getting paid, but workers who actually rely on their salaries for everyday life,
right,
they're not getting paid.
And we accept that. We, the citizens, accept that this is okay for our government to do.
We have been browbeaten into the idea that this is an acceptable thing.
We've been
that
browbeaten
we don't deserve it. That
into the
what we
idea.
are given are somehow entitlements. Even the word and the
Okay.
words we use are very important. That they are entitlements.
The governments are instituted among men for the good of the governed. We need to read that. We need to inculcate that. That has to be a part of every decision that we make as a citizenry and as a leadership. That governments are instituted among men for the good of the governed. Not for the good of the corporation, not for the good of the leader, not for the good of those who are still getting paid, for the good of the governed, for all of us. That's the purpose of government. You know, other than that, it's not government. It's something else. It's people
And
ruling over you.
it's despotism, and
Despotism.
and it's surely not good.
Right. You know, I say that this crisis is an example of dysfunction. Why do
And you, I believe, you brought up the idea in the show maybe a year ago or so about toxic normalcy or toxic normality. That we are, as human beings, almost created to get used to situations and to adapt them as a new normal, despite how negative or bad they
yes,
can be.
yes,
And we are, I don't know, whether by engineering or just by fate or whatever you want to call it, just being pushed with this new situation. And we're just getting used to it. It's like, well, the government shuts down every year, or we can do a continuing resolution, or certain things just have to go by the wayside, and that we're just forced to become accustomed to it.
well, these things here, you're talking about, actually go to bigger and grander things. For example, you say, I'm going to be educated. What does it mean to be educated? I'm going to expand my knowledge. I'm going to educate my country. I'm going to expand the understandings, the perspectives that our kids have and see of the world. They're not going to be geographically myopic. They're going to know that there's a world that exists outside the United States. They're not going to be linguistically myopic. They're going to learn other languages and to think ideas in other words. I'm going to expand the education base of my citizens as I grow as a nation. And the other idea, the competing idea that we have accepted, I'm going to narrow the knowledge and education of my kids, of my citizens, so that they do not oppose me. I'm going to tell them that there was no slavery. I'm going to lie to them about what was history. I'm not even going to say to them what are the great principles on which this nation was founded.
And in the entire education system, from elementary through graduate, I am going to underfund and under-encourage
Yes.
music and art
Yes.
and philosophy
Yes.
and just the whole principle of education itself. And we will have one of two groups. We will have either those who are taught in trades, and let's just take the character judgment out because there's none. That's a good thing. It's a good thing to know how to learn a trade and to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And it's a good job to have. It's not that. But there will be two main groups. It will be that group, and it will be those who are in the STEM. Also not a bad thing. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
No, it's even more restrictive than that.
Fair enough. But that middle group.
Pure science, for example.
Yeah. That
won't exist.
That group that really encourages creativity and thinking, that's a group that could learn that, perhaps that polluting the Everglades is a bad thing, that making our air breathable is a good thing, that not massacring groups of indigenous peoples is a good thing as well. Not massacring them is a good thing.
Not massacring would have been a good thing. Well, we continue to massacre them today. Here, we have people in an immigration so-called crisis. Immigration crisis. What is our understanding of it? Our people understand that these people just popped up at our border and they're savages and they propose a security threat to the United States. Do our people ever become educated to learn why? Excuse me? Why would a human being leave his home carrying her baby on its hip and walk 1,000 miles? What would cause a human being to do that? Isn't that a relevant question, America? Why are those savages there?
But also, doesn't it sound familiar? Does that
Yeah.
not? Does that story not resonate
Oh
somewhere
yeah. Oh
in
yeah.
our deeper mythos,
And
perhaps in a
and
mythos which we re-experience
oh
every year around the 25th of
oh
December? Does that not sound
oh
exceptionally familiar? And do
oh.
you somehow have enough cognitive dissonance to not connect those two
I
situations to
thought maybe
say
you were talking about the potato famine.
that's a good reason too? Then that's also a good
Yeah.
reason.
I mean, there have been a lot of the pogroms. I mean, there have been a lot of good reasons for people to migrate. The pogroms was a good one. When you're killing the Jews in Russia and they get out and come to someplace else. When you're killing the Jews in Europe and they come out and they try to go someplace else. What happens when you go to Honduras? Your country goes to Honduras. And when, understand this, 62% of the arable land, 62% of the land that the people who live in that country, the welfare of the people, 62% of that is owned by United Fruit. Of course, you won't see United Fruit today. It says Chiquita has a pretty little dancing lady who sells bananas.
Is that Chiquita?
Yes.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
United Fruit became Chiquita. Yeah, that's why you don't look.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. But they own 62% of the land that people would use to grow food on. The people who are indigenous to that place, the people who are part of that sovereign nation, do not have access to their own land to grow food. We won't even mention, and we should mention, and you should understand, America, that that land was not purchased in a normal way of business contracts. That land was purchased because it was backed up by our military might.
At this point, I think it's really hard, and I don't think we should really even try to disconnect capitalism from imperialism at this point. When we talk about going into a country to establish, our rights or our presence, it's to open new markets. It's pretty much primarily to open new markets.
To take markets, go back to your Howard Zinn. I recommend go to Howard Zinn and read when he talks about the beginning of our imperialism because of overproduction in the United States in the middle to late 1800s. And see that the original purpose of imperialism was to force open markets, to force Japan to to force China to open to, and even saying things like China was our natural market, meaning that we would go there and make them buy.
Japan.
Japan, exactly.
And we
Latin America was always our market.
I think Japan's a really great example of our chickens coming home to roost.
Uh-huh.
I really don't incur. I of course hate the idea of Pearl Harbor and all the Americans who died at that time. At this point I really shouldn't have to give these little caveats, but I will anyway. But at the same time, we brought them to where they were at that point. We gave them the weapons. We helped them industrialize. We almost made them industrialize.
But even more important, Ireland. Japan is an island, and it depended in modern terms on the islands around them for its resources. What were we doing in Hawaii and all those islands? What were we doing taking the tin? What were we doing taking the rubber? We are still doing these things today, and we call it our pivot to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not there as Boy Scouts. And what were we doing with our immigration policies and our racist policies against Japan? What were we doing by not selling them oil, for example?
And even if we're not in places in name, we are often there just in terms of private contractors who are all but U.S. military and representatives in name only.
That's still today. Look.
Blackwater.
Look.
Come on now.
Look. We were involved in a coup in Honduras. This is a long story of many countries We could talk about putting out Allende and bringing in, people who were the dictators and the worst of the dictators that we've ever seen in almost any place in the world that were supported, brought in, and ruled by our, say so. Honduras was such a place. And in 81, we had a coup. Who is this? When Hillary was involved in installing a government, and the Obama administration was involved in sending people, going down there and telling them who to bring back and who not to bring back. And we have created a situation there where the people have untenable lives. They're not at our border because they are savages.
Savages.
They are at our border because of our policies. America, you have to understand this. You have to understand that what you do has consequences. And what you do to other peoples in the world will come home to roost.
Of course. Absolutely right.
We have been in a situation in this country where for years, and I would say more than 2 decades, we have argued about what our immigration policy should be, and we refuse to sit down and discuss that matter because in the past, our immigration policy has always been based on one thing: race. Race, whether or not you talk about the Haitians, whether or not you talk about policies that start with point of origin, whether or not you start with just the out-and-out statement that in order to become a citizen of the United States, you have to be of the white race, which was the original Constitution.
Quotas.
Okay?
We had quotas by race.
It was always. And now we cannot sit down and have a discussion about immigration openly, one, because we have a dysfunctional Congress, but two, because we have to discuss our essential nature. The racism in America, the lack of acceptance for even the natives who were here when we arrived. We have to go back and review ourselves in order to discuss policy. And America cannot look in a mirror. So we do not have an immigration policy. We have a catch-as-catch-can procedure. We've gone through this before. Under Obama, we separated parents from child. Under Obama, we had people march up here and were stopped at the border by troops. It's not a new thing. But we still have not done anything as a Congress, as a government, or as a people to address what those policies should be. And instead, we're arguing about a wall when we should be arguing about what is our policy, how do we want people to come to this country, what people, how people, when people.
By talking about a wall, we are able to just dodge the problem and focus on a wall, because so many of those who are against a wall, they're still all about a fence. They're still all about those same very restrictive immigration policies that we have now. They're still all about not streamlining or correcting this process. They are still trying to highly restrict people entering this nation and becoming citizens. The wall is just what's the word? It's a boogeyman. It's a
red herring.
Red herring. That's the one. It's a distraction.
It's a distraction. Yeah, and it's a distraction on just so-called both sides of this government, the Democrats and the Republicans, so-called, as if they're different, But the fact of the matter is that this government cannot sit down and face itself and develop a coherent policy that it can effectuate and become a functioning government and nation again. We're at the point, we're past that point where we can sit down and look at ourselves and develop coherency. We're past that point of functionalism. We have become, and this is 2019, I'm saying, recognize it. a dysfunctional government, a dysfunctional country, and this is only one example of it. This is only one example
I
of
was
it.
going to say, I would have thought we'd become that much before now.
Well, this is, yeah. Well, again, I said there's been all these stillbirths, but I'm saying this is the year that she steps fully clothed, fully grown from her father's head.
Yeah. No, you are correct.
Yeah.
Let's see. What we got? We got a lot. Just to be clear. Like you were mentioning a little bit ago, the inability to face crisis,
Mm-hmm.
almost by design. The idea that there have been so many examples of crises in this past decade that, to be honest, to me, they were seemingly pretty easy to address, pretty easy to encounter, and to find an equitable solution that would have reduced that pressure. But almost as if intentionally, we are trying to provide an example both to the American people and to the world that, oh, there's nothing we can do. That this crisis is just something that you're going to have to endure. And as these crises increase in severity and increase in number, it's like, of course, we can't handle this because we couldn't handle that, because we couldn't handle that, because we couldn't handle the thing that happened before.
Here you go, like you go from crises to crises if you don't solve the crises, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what we do is we say, hey, that's a real sucking chest wound you got there. Let me see if I can find a band-aid. You know, and then
More like, oh, there's a chest wound. Let me give you a hug.
let me get here. Yeah, you know.
Unfortunately,
and-
the dagger is still in
right.
there.
We pretend solutions. Yeah, we pretend that like we'll never go all the way, and come to a solution like we did with school busing. You know, yeah. Obviously, the real problem is how you live, where you live. You know, if you don't desegregate housing, which the government and color of law spent so much time segregating, you cannot have integrated schools. And all these other ways that you try to do it, busing people and whatnot, are so awkward and so unmanageable, that they break down, that they can't work. So the schools become resegregated, obviously. And because attitudes, of course, never change, But they're not looking to solve the problem. The problem is desegregated housing. The problem is that you produce ghettos and send people into them. The problem isn't that you create a Trump realtor. The problem is that you create places that those Trump realtors can operate. That you say to them, we're going to give you the ability to own, to participate, to make this money in this particular way. Because we want to keep these other people out. Segregation is what gave you the Trump millionaires.
And segregation and that redlining is still, if not directly in name, but sometimes directly in name, is still happening. And it's still a policy of the American government, and it is still occurring.
Absolutely. So if you don't want to deal with the problem itself, and you keep putting these different dressings on top of it, these coatings, of course, get old and they wear away.
Much like Clinton back in the 90s, when he pivoted to being tough on crime, when the Democratic Party could no longer be called soft on crime, not that they ever should have been in the first place. That took yet another responsibility away from solving the actual societal issues that caused the rampant drug use in the first place, the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s. And not being tough on that is not going to solve it. Actually looking at its roots and its issues and how crack actually got where it was at that time.
It wasn't about crime.
Yeah. But to be tough on crime sure garnered a lot of votes. And it sure got a lot of funding for police. And it sure got a lot of support.
In other words, we don't intend to solve problems as we did with immigration, as we do with racism, as we could go to marry the problems. The schools funding schools. I mean, where do you want to start? You know, we don't solve these problems, and we will move away from the insightfulness that is necessary to look at the nub of the problem. And since we don't want to face the nub of the problem, we could keep putting these coats on top of it and acting as though we're doing something. What we're doing is just kicking the can down the road for when this thing is going to emerge and kick us in the face again. You know, we don't solve problems. Therefore, of course, we go from crisis to crisis. You know, globalization is another one that's coming to its demise, its head. You know, we came up with this grand scheme of globalizing everything.
And let's not get it twisted. It was globalization for the purpose of our corporations. It was for the purpose of markets. It was not for the betterment of the people. Even though we might have paid lip service to it, we might have said, well, they need jobs too.
Yeah.
Those workers, I mean, let's call them what they are, those slaves in Malaysia deserve $1 a day too, and they deserve company housing. Let's call it what it is. Slave barracks. They deserve that too. No one deserves that. No one deserves any of this.
But what you have is an opportunity for globalists, for people who have nothing to do with your local, your even necessarily your country, to make decisions that are economic and otherwise for you, that you have no ability to make decisions for yourself. For example, you have a situation where Canada can sue you because the money that they expected to make, they didn't make because you had a rule to protect your environment. I mean, this is what globalization has given us. Globalization has given us in Europe, the European Union, the central banks. The IMF turns out to be a scam as far as I'm concerned. We invented the IMF in 47 or 46. And we decided that we're going to use it to develop, to help nations, third world, etc., develop. And then what we used it for was to put them in hook to us. That we had something to hold over them and milk the money out of their society.
We will forgive your debts if you do our bidding.
Yeah, okay.
And then we'll give you new debts, and then we'll relieve those if you do more of our bidding.
Good example of it coming to a head is in France. I mean, they got away a lot in Greece. You know, they got away a lot in Italy. You know, they even invented a system where the people in those countries can't control their own money. They no longer can create their own money, but they have to pay from the money that European Brussels decides, the central bank decides, and take off the top that which they say they should take off the top, i.e. you have to spend a 3% for this or a 4% for this. And they started charging different countries different rates so that they can keep them under their powers. You come to a point where the French, as an example, and the Italians are there too now, are saying no more. This is your yellow vest. They're saying no more. And here's an example. You get a Macron, he says, oh, the people are concerned about the environment. This is a good way to raise money. I'm going to put a fuel tax. And the people say, no, you can't put a fuel tax. How are you going to tax the poor people to raise money for the environment? So he says, okay, I won't have a fuel tax. And they said, but you still got to take care of the environment. Now, why did we get into this situation? Because he doesn't want to tax the rich.
And he won't. All this outcry.
That's here.
All this.
That's all through Europe.
Ridiculousness. All this burning of the door of the Bank of France in Rouen on the 29th. And wow, good job. Good job, y'all. Good job, Gilles Lejeune. I think it's Gilles Lejeune. Good job for that. But this carbon tax and all carbon taxes, and hopefully what will not be enacted here as part of the Green New Deal, if we still want to call it that.
What Green New Deal?
It's still being spoken of.
Yeah. Go ahead.
But
we'll get to that.
That will. It's a carbon tax, and it's meant to primarily punish the poor and the middle class, if that can still be said to exist.
It's a way of avoiding putting the burden where it should be put.
And it's largely putting the responsibility on,
The backs of those
yeah.
people, yeah,
It's
and
saying, oh, you better recycle your plastic. You better, not eat meat. You better do this and you better do that. And look, that's good. You probably should do that or shouldn't do that. You probably should take responsibility for your own life. But it's not primarily your fault. It's not mostly on you. It's not even a little bit on you. It's 90% on the major corporations who made the I just read this. I believe Tyson Foods and the nitrogen they released in terms of their meat production helped to make the mouth of the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico one of the largest dead zones of water on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And
it will keep doing it.
That's not because John Q. Public eats meat. That's
No.
because Tyson is an immense and greedy
Right.
and soulless corporation. That's on them.
Well, they have come up with a system of globalization and financialization. They financialize everything, including, we were talking last week, Hakuna Matata. Somebody else's language, somebody else's culture. Disney tried to trademark the Day of the Dead. Could you imagine that? The Day of the Dead, the whole Mexican celebration, under the trademark of Disney. Could you imagine financialization? You can financialize anything.
Yeah.
I can financialize a dog's bark. I can financialize a tree. I can financialize a log, but I can't financialize oxygen. And that's the rub.
Not yet. But once the air gets really bad and you can sell that canned air.
Well, we did a thing like that for Nadine's Arts House one time.
Or gas masks.
Yeah. We cannot face a crisis because in order to face the crisis, you either, for example, once you make a decision that you're not going to tax the poor, the rich people, you're only going to put the burdens on the poor. And once that becomes your mantra and you operate that way and you make all your decisions within that narrow frame, you're lost. You're lost. Once you take away that whole resource that the rich people have and keep and accumulate and store, once you just come to a point where you say, we're not any longer interested in what those rich people are doing with all their resources and money and whatnot that they're taking out of the economy and not allowing the rest of us to use, once we do that and put the burden on the poor, then we cannot make decisions that solve problems.
We can't. And it makes it so much easier to say, well, I guess we can't. It's that shifting of burden.
This is the year that the French citizens say no. They're suing the country. You will talk about the Yellow Vests, but for example, they're suing 100.8 million are suing the French government because of what it's not doing on global warming. In other words, you cannot pretend to do something by putting a burden on the poor and not do anything, and we're supposed to fall for this again, and we're not falling for it again. So this is the year of the wake up. This is the year the little people start to wake up.
Whoa, Bill, I'm sorry. Did I hear hope?
Yeah.
In your voice?
I don't know.
Did I hear a light at the end of the tunnel?
I didn't go that far. I said this is the year to wake up.
Who are you?
We're going to start the fight.
Sorry.
They started the fight. The fight has started. That don't mean it's going to be won. And believe me, they're fighting back. Now the cry in France has become that Macron's got to go. Because nothing he's going to do, obviously, is going to go far enough in order to reshape the direction. So he's got to go.
He will not.
Of course not. And Hong Kong, they're having this. And Tel Aviv, they're having this. And Italy, they're having this. In England, they're starting to have this.
Also, Netanyahu will not go.
Hey, not now. They got corruption charges that he's going to have to face coming this April and May. At the same time, he's running for re-election. It's going to be an interesting situation here because you can bet that we'll try to start the war with Iran before that happens.
I mean, absolutely so. But in Netanyahu, he is somehow wildly popular in Israel. He has huge popular support. And many wish that he was even more extreme than he is.
And that tells you what kind of crazy person you have to be an Israeli citizen. And I make that same statement about us. You know, what kind of crazy person you have to be a United States citizen? What kind of crazy person you have to accept the idea that it's okay to drone people 26,000 times in a year? That you could accept your president sitting down with a kill list in the morning and killing people before he goes to bed at night. That we as a nation accept that, and we as a nation, therefore, are crazy. Yeah, okay.
We as a nation are crazy, but that's also not what we're trying to get at because we knew that. That was it's quite obvious. We have a section entitled Journalism and Politics, and I think this is a very worthwhile section to cover. But I first wanted to just speak on the state of journalism in 2018, entering 2019, and just congratulate the United States in entering the top 5 most dangerous countries for a journalist to live in. It's a sad day. And we, of course, saw the brutal slaying of Jamal Khashoggi, and we saw the death of reporters around the world. Malta, the death of the woman regarding the Panama Papers, and just the uncovering and the complete squelching of any discussion of the Panama Papers. And just this incredible disdain and disregard for the idea of true journalism, the idea of a true fourth estate. And now we just get these corporatized, homogenized, big business, milquetoast, just fully, not fully perhaps, but very compromised, very in step news sources that just, even if you're watching, let's take for a moment a look at Sinclair, even if you think you're watching your local news and you're hearing from your local reporters on local issues, you could be hearing the same thing on thousands of stations around the country. And you could be hearing the same sort of tilted rhetoric in every local market around the country. You could be hearing the exact same thing. And that's insidious because people just assume that that's local. They assume that that's their own personal community and their own people who are saying this.
That's what we've sold them. That's what it had been, and that's what we continue to sell. Yeah, okay. And the other thing about journalism, you know, where are our journalists? We have fewer and fewer and fewer journalists. We, as a nation, under Obama, prosecuted more journalists called whistleblowers, or because of whistleblowers, or in relationship to whistleblowers, than in all the history of this country and all the history of others. That's where we put our journalists who try to tell the truth. But where is journalism? Here's where journalism is. You have a Khashoggi, isn't that his name? Who goes into an embassy. No, it's a consul.
The consulate, yeah.
Consulate that belongs to Saudi Arabia, and he doesn't come out alive. And oh my God, we go crazy that this foreign bad actor, Salman, did this. Where is journalism? We have a guy, and I said this before and I'm going to say it again, by the name of Julian Assange, who did nothing but tell the truth. He told the truth on war crimes that we were committing in Iraq. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, never a lie. And he told the truth on how the Democrats were dissing Bernie Sanders in the primary. And he told other truths. And it is known by us, the citizens and the rest of us, including all those so-called journalists, that the moment he leaves the Ecuadorian embassy in London, he will be sent to the United States, held incognito, given a secret trial, and will never ever be heard from again.
So
that's the state of journalism. We tell the world that we will secretly indict a person for telling the truth, for operating as a journalist. And we will say to the world that it is okay. We will say to our citizens that it is okay. And our so-called journalists will not speak up.
And we will make it the new normal, and people will become accustomed to it, and will be that one step closer to that total control. But may I also say that a trial in secret is not democratic.
It's not a trial.
It's not transparent. It's a tribunal.
Yes, right.
I think the word tribunal really carries a lot more accurate overtones to it. It's done in darkness. It's done in secret, and the public need not know.
And what does the Constitution say? That everybody is entitled to a fair and open trial and to face his accusers.
Even then, they knew that, obviously, because they had faced tyranny. They had seen monarchy just crush a people. They had seen that sort of dictatorship, that one-party rule. They had seen what that can do. That's why they said that, look, perhaps a person must face consequences. And I'm not saying Assange should or shouldn't. Probably shouldn't. But regardless.
What did he do? What crime did he do?
Yeah.
We're charging him with espionage. What espionage?
Exactly. But regardless, whatever someone does, it should be out in the open. It should be a jury of your peers. It should be treated with transparency.
For example, starting with the charges.
Well, they're not even naming the charges.
What is he being charged with? We know under the general idea of espionage, he's being charged. Using a law that we passed in 1917 to stop people from discouraging people to go to World War I. That's a pretense. That's BS.
Also, it's a BS law.
It was a BS law to begin with, and it is certainly a BS law now, all these years later.
Also, speaking of BS laws, the Communist Party is illegal in the United States. It's still illegal. It's still illegal to be a member of the Communist Party in the United States. This is 2018, everybody. We're still scared of shadows lurking in the dark.
Here we go. Look, talking about journalism. There's a guy, he was arrested in Russia. They're charging him with being a spy. Ex-Marine. And I'm just looking at the news coverage, talking about journalism for a minute. CBS, I'm going to concentrate on. They came up and they told us that our Secretary of State, the pompous Pompeo, gave the Russians a very strict warning about doing this dastardly deed. And then I heard Pompeo say, we're going to ask you what the charges are, and if they're not appropriate, then we're going to ask you to release him. I said, hey, that's a really strict warning. And why isn't he being more forceful than that? Despite the fact that they misled us with their interpretation by telling us it was a strict warning, and if we didn't listen to it ourselves, we'd only have their headline. Okay? So you say there's something suspicious about this thing because we're not doing a good job here of speaking out strongly. And then it turns out, and the story continues, and it will continue. And watch this story, ladies and gentlemen, if you can. It turns out that this guy has a passport that says he's a citizen of the UK. He has a passport that says he's a citizen of Canada. He has a passport that says he's a citizen of Mongolia.
That's a good one.
And he has a passport that says he's a citizen of the United States. And he works for security firms. And he's been a contractor for military people around the world.
All sounds solid to me.
Now, I go back to CBS and I don't find a follow-up story. But I do find a story where they tell us that this woman who is in jail, her name is Butina, is a convicted Russian spy. And I know for a fact, because I read the indictment, that she was charged with failure to register as a foreign lobbyist. So they give me a lie of omission by not recovering and telling us then what happened later on, after this person was arrested, and telling us the suspicious nature of his biography. They never told us that. Then they come in and tell us a lie that they keep repeating about this other woman who's the Russian woman. Consequently, we are left with an idea that we picked up a Russian spy and they picked up an American citizen in retaliation. And that's the narrative that we're running with. Mm-hmm. And that is not the reality. Last year, Time magazine published a picture of President Trump on the cover with a picture of a young, I don't know if she was Honduran or Guatemalan, Venezuelan, but a young girl. And the headlines told us that he was separating these people from their families. And it turns out that the young girl that was on the cover of the magazine was not separated from her mother.
Oh, yeah? She was just an actress?
She was just, she was an immigrant for sure, but she was with her mother and they were being processed. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't kids who were separated from their parents. But when you present one on the cover of a magazine, show me one of those kids.
Because there's certainly plenty of them.
There's plenty of them. But intentionally, with full knowledge, you put on the cover of your magazine something that was untrue. And it's okay. We have lost journalism. We have lost the respect for truth. It is now okay to project an idea creatively, whether or not it has any relationship to reality or not. This is the state of journalism that we are practicing in the United States right now. The journalism of narrative, the journalism of official narrative.
And there are real journalists remaining. They're just not part of the major news outlets. They're in the sidelines. They're those sources like The Intercept, Democracy Now! They're those reporters. They're the bloggers. They're people who go in themselves and get the stories. They're the people who, much like those in the past tune into mental hospitals, or in those times it was insane asylums, who went into those and got those firsthand accounts. There are people who go into factory farms and actually videotape the horrors that happen to animals there. These people still exist, and they're still around. They're just not part of major media outlets. And they take their lives in their own hands when they do this, because the penalties for any sort of action against especially major corporations is harsh and severe. You have special ag-gag laws where if you try to go to, say, a slaughterhouse and document that kind of exploitation of animals, you can be served with multiple felonies and spend 30 years in jail just for taking a video. So there are laws. They have rearranged and set up the system so that that kind of action is especially punished, and so as to deter people even further.
Well, what happened in this process is that we've lost the notion of journalism. It's no longer relevant. We talked one time about how in the past you had to go and you had to verify something with 3 sources. And these were principles. Mm-hmm. The principle of fact leading a story. The principle of going where the facts lead you. These are no longer the principles that we practice. That journalism is dead. And we allow it to die. And those people who you are talking about, yes, they are still there, but they are struggling to be heard. Because this other insidious thing has taken over what journalism used to be and pretending to be journalism when it's purely narrative entertainment. You know, it's entertainment that pushes the narrative. You know, it's no different from that group that's in England that was supposed to be telling us about Russia and funded by the taxpayers, and what it is it's doing is telling us negative things about the opposition, the Labour Party. You know.
Oh
Uh, Here we have. I got a Twitter the other day that what's her name? Elizabeth Warren is running for president. You know, she's going to run for president. And I'm reminded that last year we had a big thing because the president, he used to call her Pocahontas, because she claimed that she had Indian American, Native American blood.
Mm-hmm.
And it came down to a big thing that she had to go and prove that she had this, and the results came forward. The results came forward that maybe somebody 6 or 7 generations ago, one person may have been a Native American in her family. Or I don't know if it meant that somebody walked through the village who was Native American. I don't know. But somehow or another, she has this modicum amount of Native American blood. And so they made the narrative that she was vindicated. But you understand this? She benefited from scholastic arrangements that were there to benefit minorities because she claimed herself to be a Native American. She took advantage of minority scholarships. That Harvard took advantage of saying that it had a minority, 2 minorities, a Native American and a woman, in these positions that she was in. In other words, frankly, they used the supposedly Indian status to the benefit of her and to Harvard. But that's not the story we told. We told the story that she was vindicated. And I think the story is that she should be condemned.
Oh, there was also the story that she fell right into a really blatantly laid trap and just jumped in it face first and just face planted. But no, I do believe that's an accurate thing.
If they didn't do that in the first place, there couldn't have been no trap. You know, I knew a guy, I was a part of a minority program back in, when was that? I guess 80-something, 60-something. It's a long time ago. It was the 60s. 67, there it goes. And I went to Columbia University to study journalism, the Graduate School of Journalism, because I was a minority, and they didn't have minorities. They had all these explosions in the cities, and they didn't have any minorities covering the news. And so they had this big commission, and this commission met and said, America is divided, you know, half black and half white, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we need to have minorities. So they started hiring minorities and training minorities to do the news. There was a guy who called himself, his name was Jerry Rivers, you know. Mm-hmm. And when they offered this minority program, this guy who had been passing as Jerry Rivers, white boy, became Geraldo Rivera again. Mm-hmm. And applied for the program. You understand? Now it was an advantage to be a Puerto Rican. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That about fits his body of work too.
Yeah.
I've very rarely seen someone so able to flip and to flop, and to just really fall into whatever group was most advantageous.
Well, these are the kind of games we play in America. You know, whether or not you're Harvard or whether or not you're a minority journalism program, we can play these games in America. You know, because ostensibly at heart we are racist, and we don't want to overcome the racism. We take advantage of somebody like Elizabeth Warren to claim something rather than to go out and get a real Native American. So we united a Native American a position because we give it to an Elizabeth Warren. And I'm not voting for you.
Well, I'm not voting for you either. Oh, you meant her. Okay.
I'm not voting for her.
Sounds good.
You know.
So, we got like 40 minutes left and lots of content.
Finish this out real quick
Yeah,
here.
okay.
A couple of things. In 2019, because journalism continues and politics continues.
That's true.
Okay, the politics of resistance is the politics that we're into practicing right now. The politics of resistance to impeaching the EMF, as somebody said from the Democratic Party the other night. You know.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Now, this narrative is here, and Mueller is going to release a report this year. I guarantee you that report will have nothing in it that shows Russian collusion. But I guarantee you that there's going to be a lot made of that report about other things. And that we're going to continue, therefore, on this disruptible path towards impeachment and no discussion of health care, no discussion of minimum wage, certainly no discussion of, or very little discussion of, the environment. And I say very little because that discussion is already underway weekly. WEAKLY. This is going to be a bad year for journalism because journalism is going to continue to lie. And the narrative is going to be one of supporting the resistance. And the narrative that the journalists and the politicians are going to give us is going to be one that continues dysfunctionality and has nothing to do with governing our nation. This is going to be a wasted year. A good example of it, I think.
It is January 5th, and Bill is already calling it a wasted year.
Yes, I am. I'm calling it a wasted year.
Where was that hope you were talking about earlier?
It's
like
I said the fight will start. I didn't say it's anything in terms of outcomes. I mean, when I talk about people going to the streets, you tell me that they got a lot of weapons out there in the street, and it's true. What will happen in our politics, and it's going to be poorly reported, is an example of what Speaker Pelosi has done with respect to what you mentioned before, the Green
New Deal.
New Deal. She has proposed
PAYGO. Also by appointing another congresswoman other than Ocasio-Cortez
to do another program
of whatever this program is or whatever this committee
is. It's a defunct program. It's the climate change panel.
Oh, so in order to debate whether it's real or not. By the way,
the climate change panel
it's real. Climate change is
in existence
real.
A few years ago, and it became defunct. Nobody, it didn't do any work. And now that that this new deal, this Green New Deal, and this is not a new idea. It's an old idea too, but it's come to fruition because people are recognizing that it's absolutely necessary that we go from fossil fuel to green fuel, green energy. So what she did, and when a couple of weeks ago we were talking about this, we talked about only 24 Congress people coming over to sign up for this Green New Deal, and it got up to 40 and climbing. Pelosi said, we got to do something. And I said, we thought that she was just going to marginalize and keep that out, out there someplace.
Not quite.
But people started joining. So she had to make another move. So she goes back to this old defunct thing, and she appoints somebody from Florida, Representative Castor, to become the chairperson or to represent this now revived panel. The first the first argument that comes up is that they did not want people who were paid by the fossil fuel industry to be on this panel.
But I think their response was, it is unconstitutional to apply such a litmus test.
Yeah. And of course, it's not unconstitutional.
You can pick whoever you
You
want.
could pick whoever you want for whatever panel you want for whatever reason. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of panels.
You don't even have to give a reason. Just pick whoever you want.
No, you know, they're spoiling the initiative. I wrote a quote because I wanted to read this quote. This is from, the Sunrise Group. These are the kids. These are young kids who are suing the government, Without a mandate to create a plan and a requirement that its members don't take fossil fuel money, we are deeply concerned that this committee will be just another of the many committees we've seen failing our generation, our entire lives.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. This is
Clearly
Sunrise Movement.
what it
the
is.
Co-founder Vashini, Prakash.
And no wonder that these young people, and even those in my generation, are so incredibly disillusioned and jaded, because we have seen this time and time and time and time again, and we see it yet again. We see this movement that really is just out of touch.
And Pelosi is in power to delay. If she is the big time money gatherer for the Democratic Party, then you could bet your bottom dollar she's got some real handfuls of fossil fuel money.
Oh, exactly. From where is the money coming? It's from there. And they don't donate for free. And if you go away they'll just donate to someone else. And it's as old as politics itself. Politicians are never a bad investment, because if they don't do what you want, you can always just invest in another.
You can buy them cheap. You buy them cheap.
Yeah.
A couple $100,000, you can make millions. Okay.
That's even a low estimate.
Yeah, I know. So you said we got, 30 minutes. Where do you want to go?
35.
I do want to mention this Open Market Institute. People, you should recognize that. Go online and type in Open Market Institute and read their stuff. We talked about globalization and financialization, and we're coming to recognize that if you look at the tenets and the operations of those two things alone, that you will see that it's not about capitalism. It's not about capitalism anymore, if it ever has been about capitalism. It's about schemes and scams. One of the schemes and scams that we have going on here, for example, right now, is to keep the interest rates at zero, because if you keep it at zero, then companies can borrow money and use that money to buy other companies. It's not costing them anything. They can use that money to buy back their own stock.
Which is
it's not costing them anything.
Which is what they do.
They do both these things. Look at the mergers, and this is what I'm telling the people to go to Open Market Institute about, is to look at the concentration of American businesses in the last 15 years. Look at the number of airlines that there used to be and the number of airlines that there are now. Just a couple of things for you to look at. In other words, obviously there's no free market. But I'm going to give you an example of the work, and in that they tell us, for example, that it's come down to, you talk about cat food, there's 4 companies in the whole world that does 97% of the pet food.
No, I see the first one on the list, and I'm already pissed.
Nestle.
Yep.
4 companies. Nestle has 57% of all the cat food How do they have it? They own Purina. They own Fancy Feast. They own Felix and Friskies.
If we do one good thing this year, world, let's take down Nestle. Let us destroy Nestle from the bottom to the top. However we want to do it, I'm not advocating murder. I don't know. But let's do it because they are everywhere. They are insidious and they are polluting and destroying our world more than almost anybody else. We need to do something, and they are one of the biggest and the worst.
And corrupting, because they corrupt governments all over the place. Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors own 75% of the beer in the world. In the world, ladies and gentlemen. You know, how about coffins? Hillenbrand and Matthews have a 76%, one company in the world, in manufacturing coffins and caskets. You know, this is an effort to really introduce the fact that you go to the store, you see all of these brands, but guess what? They're all being operated by the same company.
And
Sarah Miller, Deputy Director of the Open Markets Institute, that's her statement. She calls this a system. Understand this. She calls this a system. She calls this system that we are in right now, she calls it a scam economy, where competition is an illusion and choice is an illusion.
Because who would think that Purina and Fancy Feast and Friskies would be owned by the same company? You'd figure, oh, these are different entities. They're all competing against each other. Where, however, one company just owns them all.
Yeah, well, we talked about newspapers and we talked about television stations and we talked about how many there used to be and how many there are now. And we talked about, you have poor companies here that you could buy cell phones from, and two of those are getting ready to merge. So you're going to have three companies, you know. Well.
The illusion of choice.
The illusion of choice.
Of competition.
The illusion that this is capitalism. You know, we keep selling you capitalism, and we keep selling you capitalism as if it's equated to democracy, that these two things are related. These two things have nothing to do with each other. But the fact of the matter is that we don't even practice capitalism. Capitalism is not a market process. It's a control the market process. And even as we understood what the imperialistic intentions of capitalism is to force a market. And we have the same thing, for example, happening. Right now, here you have, and this is another example of things to come 2019. Apple lost $64 billion in terms of its overall.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
I thought it was more.
It was $64 billion. That's the last figure I heard. And they say it's because they didn't make the sales that they expected to make in China. And they're blaming Trump. You know. Understand this, ladies and gentlemen. You know, Trump in this case is a red herring. This is a guy who you point to whenever you want to get out of taking responsibility for something. Mm-hmm. But just think of this a minute. You have, what do they call Huawei? Wawa. It's a Chinese company,
no.
Huawei, that makes cell phones. Smartphones. Huawei. Okay, they make smartphones. Mm-hmm. They make a smartphone that has all the features that you will find in an iPhone. Mm-hmm. The iPhone sells in China, and there's 4 of them, between $600 and $1,100. This Huawei phone that has all the same features sells for $400. The average Chinese wage is $10,000 a year. Now let's talk about market.
Sure.
You know, let's talk about market forces. If you want to talk about capitalism, the answer to this disparity is in the market. Who would spend $600 to $1,100 for a phone they could get for $400 if you're making $10,000 a year?
Of course. And I
So,
think that example is even a little bit, uh, I don't know, weak. Not weak, but there are even starker examples because
mhm.
Huawei makes a phone for $200
uh,
that equates to the iPhone that's 7 or 800.
wow.
Even their lower
Wow.
cost
Wow.
ones are
Wow.
very good.
Wow. Okay. Now, here's the thing. We thought that we could force a market in China. And go back again to Howard Zinn, the People's History of the United States, and look at when we try to open those Chinese markets and what our attitude was, and tell me that it has not changed. It has not changed. We're going to make a market there. And not only are they going to make a market, but they projected that market.
Mhm.
They didn't lose money. They didn't make money. They're coming back in some ways to a better evaluation of what their wealth is, minus a projection that was never real. And yet they can stand up in front of America and blame our politics. Like this equation between what our politics, our democracy is, and what capitalism is.
Mhm.
And is capitalism failing itself? Because if the market is the determiner, it is obvious which phone should sell in China.
Oh, God. I mean, free market capitalism, sure. I just don't know if capitalism has to be inherently free market. And it seems like any of the times we try to instill capitalism in an area through militaristic means, through creating that market, that's no longer a free market.
There's no such thing.
And we may pay lip service to the idea of the free market and competition, but we really don't believe in it. We just
Yeah.
believe that people like that idea, the idea that you can be in your garage and have an idea and become a billionaire from it. The idea that pulling yourself up by your bootstraps to become one of the rich and the powerful. America, this country of temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
You remember the Powell memo.
Mhm.
In the Powell memo, it is specifically stated that we have to sell the idea of the free market. It didn't say that there was such a thing. It said we had to sell the idea
Mhm.
of a free market. There was no free market at the time or at this time, or basically at any time, you know. But we have to sell the idea. And so we put those words out there over and over again: free market, free market, free market,
Mhm.
until people believe in such a thing. But it's only an abstraction. It's only an idea that they made to sell and make an equation using the word free with capitalism and democracy as if they're the same thing. They're not the same thing.
Well, they used that when they were trying to sell the American dream too.
Mm,
That the American dream is a democratic one first and a capitalistic one second,
mm.
whereas it's a capitalistic one first and a democratic one nothinged or nothinged, zeroth.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, this I didn't see this ad. It sounds pretty rough. The idea that big business can end racism, sexism, and global crisis and income disparity. Because to me, it seems that is exactly what big business wants. That is exactly
Yeah.
what it wants to promote.
I was amazed. I was watching, I think it was the Cotton Bowl. And of course, throughout the game, they tried to induce me to join the armed services. But when they weren't inducing me
Where are you gonna?
no, they didn't convince me
Hmm.
that I should be a hero. And
An army of one.
yeah, I
God,
like that one.
God, that doesn't even make sense.
Be all you could be.
Hmm.
Okay, I'm not all I could be, but at any rate, I'm watching the Cotton Bowl, and it comes on. It says it talks about the problem of racism, talks about the problem of income inequality. you know, it talks about the problems that we have here in America, and then it goes on to conclude that the best solution to all these problems, including wage disparity, is big business. That business has the answers, and business is the best answer to all these problems that we have in America.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they why we are where we now
Yes, they are.
So how is this not immediately just decried as insane?
Because we, as a country, do not allow critical thinking. We will bombard our nation with this message, and it will be supported by our media, and it will not be challenged by our journalists, and it will be inculcated in our people, and it will be heard over and over and over. The solution to everything is business. Blackwater is back. They're the solution to our wars. We're going to send Blackwater instead of the United States Army. And then we won't be responsible for the dastardly deeds they do, like war crimes.
Except, of course, we are.
Yeah, this is what we're going to do. Business, I read 1984, I saw the movie. I saw business, and I saw business at war, and I saw business in charge of a society. And, you know, I think he made a very, very amazing forecast. He made an amazing prediction. He is a prophet. He is a prophet. That business modality is here today. And darn it, unless we learn to become critical thinkers, unless we relearn the necessity of expanding our knowledge, unless we learn the necessity of learning other languages and learning our geography and learning that other people in the world have cultures and intelligence.
As if there was any reason to think that they didn't.
We gave that message over and over, and we still give that message over and over.
Yeah.
You know, I listen to these so-called left-wing nuts. I listen to Stephanie Miller, talk radio. And these are supposed to be the people on the left-hand side. These are supposed to be the liberals and the so-called progressives. The one feeling I get from them over and over and over again is that these are people who think that they are superior to the rest of us. This is a small group of people. I don't know if they're the elites in New York or the elites in California. I don't know who they are in particular, but I listen to them call in. And the one notion I get over and over and over again is that they are smarter than the deplorables. And obviously, I mean, I don't think that they accept me. I mean, not that they won't have an association with a black person, because they will use that to show how liberal they are. But to have a real relationship where I can talk to you equally, that you'll accept me as a peer, I don't think that's possible, listening to the attitudes of these people. They think that people, for example, in the Midwest, who don't have jobs and who are in deplorable conditions, are themselves, because of this situation, not good people. And I hear this over and over again when they talk about it as Trump's base. We continue to see the victims of opiates, for example. They're victims of opiates, but they're the deplorable ones.
Yep.
You know,
absolutely.
And they just they make me angry so many times. It's like, who do you think you are? Because you have a little bit of money in your pocket and you were born white in America, because your parents were able to put you into a good school, and you come out with the superior notion, with the superior attitude, I say you need to go back to school and learn something. Because, you know, those numbers that we write, they come from the Arabs. They didn't come from the Romans. As a matter of fact, Roman numerals are very awkward. You know who carried the culture? That was the Western culture during the Dark Ages?
The Byzantine.
The Byzantines. You know, I mean, I'm telling them about their own cultures. You know, they weren't so doggone smart. They depend on these other people. Hey, where did y'all get these terms that you use, like dig this and dig that? Well, how did you learn to blue over the third note? How did you even learn what notes are about outside of that 8 scale octave thing that you use in Europe with all the stiffness? It makes some good music, but it ain't going to give you jazz. It ain't going to give you blues. It certainly didn't allow for the development of rock and roll. And let's not talk about dance. In other words, what I'm saying to you is like the word lasso. It comes from another culture. You take it in and you use it as if it's yours, but it is not. And in the process of that, you should learn to recognize those cultures that these things come from. And understand that they're just as bright, just as brilliant, just as you could ever expect to be.
And it's absolute hubris to believe that anything differently. And yet that is what we think, and that's what we're taught. Unless you are a deplorable, and then, you got no hope. So, we got like 20 minutes, so
okay.
Let's skip to near the end here, because I think it's a very important one, where you say, meanwhile at home on the racism front, nothing will change, because we've been doing this show for over 3 years now, and nothing has changed. It was very early in our show where we had the Trayvon Martin case.
Mm-hmm.
And the national outcry, but also the national outcry the other way. There was a big one the other way who said, how dare this thug come into a white neighborhood and do this? I don't even know where to start on that one. But then we have further examples every single year, and we have examples this year. We have examples right here in Harrisburg. We have Shalik Moss. We have a march for him every year. But we have examples that keep occurring. We don't have any kind of notion that this is going to stop. And when we see people like Colin Kaepernick take a knee and not get signed to a team, even though he's a good quarterback. I'm not saying he's the best, but he's good.
He's good enough to play.
There's no reason he shouldn't be on a team. And we see NFL owners treat their players like slaves. We see old Donald Sterling take his rich friends into a locker room and show off his players like slaves. We see all the examples of this, and we don't see a change, even though there's so much passion and desire on at least one side for a change. And then you have to conclude that there is just as much on the other side for there not to be a change.
You said Sterling. Wasn't that the same name as the guy, the FBI guy? Or was he a CIA guy? They put him in jail for espionage because he gave information to a journalist. He's a black guy. And the reason that he gave information to a journalist was because he was talking about racism in the agency. And they put him in jail for espionage. And near a word has ever been raised, over these last 2 years about this man being in jail. Just last month, a young man was shot to death. 3 times he was shot in the back in a mall trying to be a good guy with a gun. And to this day, we don't know the name of the cop who shot him. And we have not seen the body cam or the surveillance film that they confiscated from the mall. In other words, committing an act of extreme racism, the killing of a black person because he's black, whether or not your accomplice have been, is not treated in terms of what justice is supposed to be about.
You get a week off with pay.
You get a week off at least.
Yeah.
But here we are, weeks later, and we still can't even find out who did the shooting, and we still can't see the evidence, about the shooting.
I think you need to look no further than Laquan McDonald in Chicago and Rahm Emanuel consciously holding up that footage because he was about to be reelected.
But the racism in the country is in part the killing. But the racism in the country is the attitude about the killing. The racism in this country is the protection of the killers. The racism in this country is never to look admittedly at one of these killings and call them for what they are. The racism in this country will not change because we will not hold up that mirror to our police and to our DAs and to our judges and even to our prisons as the racist institutions that they are. We will not hold a mirror up to ourselves. We have Jasmine Barnes, a 7-year-old girl, killed here in America. And we still won't call the killer anything but a troubled lone wolf. It's the attitudes. We don't accept that someone will stand up and say, Black Lives Matter. We can't stand up a nation and say, of course they do.
Yeah, of course they do.
We believe that Black Lives Matter just as much as any other life. No, we argue the point. And then we get a Soros who brings his politics into it and a delusion of the message. And the women better watch out too, because he's doing that same thing there. He's making your message trivial by talking about things like, I gotta go home, but baby, it's cold outside. Bring up things that we can argue. You got the David, what's his name? Kevin Hart. He's a black idiot. Played Cowboys and Indians at his son's first birthday party, where the Cowboys could shoot the Indians. We know all what Cowboys and Indians has been about in this country. And he stood there and defended this idiocy. And so they say to him, you can't do the Academy Awards. It is the Academy Awards, right? Because
Golden Globes, maybe?
I think it's Academy.
Okay.
Okay. He says, they say because you were homophobic in the past. And he says, I apologize for that. In other words, what they did now was take the argument away from what is the current thing and have the discussion of our attitudes about the Native Americans, ladies and gentlemen. They took it and they shifted the discussion to something he had already apologized for, so he has an out. And then they're talking about bringing him back as the person who's going to do the Academy Awards. Again, we did not face racism, even from this black comedian. And I put black in quotes. Even from him. Because to have the discussion that the thing was about is to have the discussion about our attitudes about Native Americans today. Our attitudes about Native Americans now.
I know people who still believe that it was a great thing that we manifestly destined the rest of this continent to the white race. They still think it's a good thing that we subjugated and made Indian cultures just disappear. They believe that we brought God to the savages. I know people today in this area, in central Pennsylvania, who consciously believe that to be true.
Wow.
I believe it was a member of the U.S. House or a Florida state rep, a black woman who said, I'm glad that my ancestors were taken from Africa and brought to the United
Wow.
States. Else, I would be still in Africa worshiping a tree.
I wish you were worshiping a tree. A tree gives us oxygen. Do you understand the significance of a tree? Do you understand that cutting down the trees is what's killing us? Oh, you should pray to trees, whoever you are, you dumb black woman. Trees are our salvation. Cutting them down is our death. Don't you get it? Yes, we should worship trees. My God. We have lost critical thinking. You know, we have become brainwashed and stupid. And I'm sorry, but this is what's going to kill us. You know, we're not smart enough to listen to the kids who at Sunrise Movement. We're not smart enough to stand up that we should have grandchildren. We're not smart enough to say, hey, stop making plastic. I don't mean recycle plastic. You know, stop making plastic.
Stop extracting natural gas and oil from the ground.
Which was in the ground, leave it in the ground.
That's a pretty simple missive, isn't it?
It's as simple as it can get, you know. But if we don't do these things, the end is obvious. But if we lack critical thinking, if we lack the gumption to put on the yellow vest, if we lack the ability to think for ourselves, or to let the Nancy Pelosi's, you know, tell us how big their gonads are. If this is the world that we think that we are safe in and secure in, then we are part of the problem and we are a part of the annihilation. We are part of the suicide.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, I just wanted to speak on one of the countries that many in this country would consider primitive and backward and third world. That is, of course, Bolivia, who is rolling out universal health care to 5.8 million uninsured individuals, while we're still up here letting people die due to their inability to afford their insulin, while we're still forcing people to go to emergency rooms for everyday procedures, while we're still charging hundreds of thousands of dollars in hospital bills to the uninsured. Bolivia, who many people in this country would see as backward and primitive, is now providing free health care for all of its uninsured citizens. What are we doing? We are reinforcing the current order, which is private health care.
Yeah. And leave me, you know, a comment that on something that you had written down here. We have to discuss it at length, and probably not just one time, but you know, times to come. You talked about socialism, and you talked about whether or not Christianity is or could be compatible with socialism. And I answered that question. I'm saying to you that Christianity, properly practiced, is socialism.
That's what I'm saying. That's my point.
Yeah, right. You know, that was a point he made over and over and over and over again. You know, if there's anything outside of love that Jesus spoke of, it has to do with money and greed.
Yeah.
You know, love implies that we look out for each other, that we take care of each other. And that means sharing the resources and not capturing them for an individual here and an individual there, but that we share them throughout our whole society, socialistically speaking.
And there's such an overriding idea amongst many evangelicals these days that if you are a Christian, you must be a conservative. You must be as right wing as you can get, which to me is baffling. And there's an individual I know from this city. He posts a lot on Facebook. I can guarantee you that he's not watching the show. Even if he was, though, that'd be great. But regardless. But he is absolutely abhorred at the idea that New York State is, or New York City is allowing parents to choose a third non-conforming gender for their babies on their birth certificates. He is up in arms that bathrooms could be used by any gender. He believes that it is just going to bring rapists and pedophiles to bathrooms because apparently that's just what they've been waiting for. But the idea of tear gassing migrants at a fence or a wall, who he calls invaders, he calls them invaders, is so just fine to him. It's all right. It's cool. It's no big deal. It's no worries at all. And that sort of reasoning just
So what Christian
boggles my
values
mind.
did you say they practiced? What are the Christian values that they practice? Which are they? Would you name a few? I mean, certainly it's not shooting at people. I mean, that's not a Christian thing.
He always just talks about fighting and that
Fighting
we must
people.
be Christian warriors.
Warriors. Yeah.
Warriors
Yeah.
for Christ.
You know, I have problems when they start singing songs like "On with Christian Soldiers."
Yep.
You know, I mean, for crying out loud, you know, or "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," which was the the Civil War song. You know, this relationship between killing, is a direct contrast. I can remember there's a description that later in the day he went up higher on the mountain and he gave to the people the Beatitudes. And I remember that among the Beatitudes was, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God."
Yeah.
Peacemakers. I like to know how those people teach the Beatitudes.
I don't know. All I know is when I've been in some churches that I've never heard hide nor hair the Beatitudes.
Oh, they don't teach them.
They teach a lot of Revelation and a
Ah,
lot of Old Testament.
yeah, right. Begetting and the killing and the killing. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff in the Old Testament. You want to talk about an adventure story?
Casting down the walls
Oh
of Jericho.
my goodness! Oh yeah,
Pillars of salt.
yeah, and they don't talk about the real wars. They only talk about them in the biblical sense. But these were real wars. These were real tactics. These were real people walking across the landscape, slaughtering other people. This was real salting of the earth. You know, this was the real throwing of the babies in the air and catching them with the sword. You know, and this was the real Judaism saying to its warriors, "You cannot come back into these villages until you get that stuff out of your system." When they're returning from war.
Of course not.
You know? And that you contrast that to Israel today, and all these crazy people are living in and amongst the society, and they're still killing people, and I think it's making the whole society a crazy killing society.
But when you live in a state of perpetual war, which the U.S. is now, but for Israel, that perpetual war is on their doorstep and in their society and their homes. There is no distance. That attitude is just interpenetrated throughout the entire society. It's everywhere. And no wonder. No wonder there is a sickness in both places and in many other places around the world. That sort of war and aggression and violence and bloodlust is just everywhere.
Well, even in the Old Testament, it tells us that this bloodlust is bad. Even amongst all the slaughterers of the Old Testament, it tells us that this lust is not good for our societies. It's not good for our villages. It's not good for the places we call home. Even in the Old Testament, it tells us that. And we refuse to see it. You know, we are a nation that if we pull everything back from the 180 countries around the world that we have armed forces, and we brought everybody back home, do you know that we would have absolutely nobody around the world threatening us? You know that we would be able to live in peace? You know, every time that we get involved, it's because we go out and do it to somebody else.
Mhm.
All we have to do is come home, and we would find peace.
Yeah, but then what if they saw our weakness and pursued us?
What weakness? The reason that we are concerned about Russia, and they spend what 1/7 or even less, they spend 43 billion on defense,
Hmm.
and we spend 715 at least billion on defense. The reason they can do that is because their defense is defense.
And let's not call ours defense. Let's be
You
let's
know,
be honest about
you
that.
see how much money we would save without 180 bases? Can you imagine what kind of schools we could build if we didn't have 180 bases?
And I feel like 180 is a very low number.
Oh, I know. I'm just throwing out the low end of it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Uh, and that 715 billion is low too. And we talk about, and this is a story that was not really fully covered. $23 trillion in an audit for the first audit ever in the Defense Department. About $23 trillion unaccounted for. We never did the story on the billions that were unaccounted for in Iraq. We don't talk about our resources, our hard-earned resources, all being thrown away in perpetual war.
And let's, as we close today, let's just also give a nod to the upcoming to be released 9/11 papers,
Yeah.
which will be very interesting.
This could be interesting. It should be very interesting.
So, from Reach Out, we just want to wish you a happy New Year 2019, and
Yeah,
boy, are
yeah.
we ever excited for the year to come.
We didn't go over all the areas because we still got some war and peace issues to talk about. And also some attitudes that we have about other nations. As people in the Koreas, North and South, try to make peace, and we try to prevent it.
Absolutely right. So, for Bill Jameson, my name is Justin Geist. Thank you for listening and for watching. This has been Reach Out.
Okie dokie, y'all.